HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
From my perspective, coaching really means that you practice as a leader, you practice as a human being, you practice curiosity, empathy, and listening. And the way in which you can do that to be successful and supportive of your people is to ask powerful questions, to practice mindful listening that leads to results. And I call that the coaching formula. So it's powerful questions plus mindful listening that lead to results.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast. We're on a mission to build a better world of work and to help you create happy, healthy, and productive workplaces. I'm your host, Tim Reitsma. My guest today, well, when I asked her, what does it mean to build a better world of work? She said, unscripted, happy, healthy workplaces. So right then I knew this was going to be a great conversation. Today we talk about coaching, and I've got a question for you. Do you lead by telling people what to do? Find yourself asking questions that start with why and maybe get defensive answers? Or perhaps you seek disengagement within your team and aren't sure why, or maybe not even asking what the reason is. Or perhaps you ask powerful questions. You're present while listening and seek results from your people in an impactful way. Lisa Martin, a professional certified coach with over 20 years experience and founder of CoachLikeLeader.com, shares with us how a coaching mindset will impact the results of your team and your organization. Did you know a coaching conversation can be short, like under 10 minutes short? So stay tuned to learn more. Lisa Martin, thank you so much for giving your time to me today and spending some time with me and our listeners. Thank you for joining the People Managing People podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, and I hope everyone who's listening is also excited. The topic is around coaching and coaching in the workplace coaching, leadership coaching. We have a couple scripted questions. We don't know where we're going to go, but it's around that mindset of coaching. And, for me, I think it's, we've talked about coaching for many years. We know it has immense benefits in our organizations, but yet we still, and I'm generalizing that collective, we still struggle with it. And so that's what we're going to get to today. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what's top of mind for you these days?
A little bit about myself. Well, I've been in the coaching world for 20 plus years. I'm certified, what's called a professional certified coach through the ICF, and that certification came in 2003. So I've been really fortunate to have been able to work with thousands of people now in the coaching realm, whether that's been one-on-one or peer-to-peer or in groups. And I have a real passion for how it can support people, but also support organizations and culture. I live in North Vancouver. I have a son who actually works with me now. And I have a cat who acts like a toddler, and I had to close the door to make sure she didn't come in today because she will, and she'll come in and she'll interrupt and you'll hear meowing. And my husband and I have been together for many, many years. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for the intro. I'm intrigued about working with your son and how that mother-son work relationship is. And, maybe I'll ask you about that offline because I'm just really curious about that. But before we get into our conversation about coaching, and I think the next two questions, for those who listen to the show, they are scripted. I'm very curious about these two things. And so I'd love to get your perspective on it. First question, what does it mean to be a leader?
Yes, that's a big question, and I'm going to do my very best to give you a limited answer to that. And I believe what it means to be a leader is to be able to be visionary, to see a road ahead, to be able to inspire others to want to join you, to take the path down that road ahead. And what that means is to be able to inspire action. But I think ultimately what being a leader is about is making the choice to do that work, Tim.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's making the choice to do that work. It's not just a fancy title. It's like, oh, so you're a manager or you're a director or a VP or on the C-suite. There's work to be done. Just because you've been given the title doesn't mean that we know everything or anything.
Well, and to your point, you may not have been given the title per se, but you are still acting as a leader. And I think that we all have the capacity to lead in our own way. But again, it comes down to choosing to play that role. Some people, that role may be given to them, but they haven't chosen it. And so that's going to make a big difference in their effectiveness. And the reverse situation is true too. You may not have been given the title, but you are acting as a leader just by nature of the way that you are and the choices that you make.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with the topic of leadership when it's geared towards new leaders or new managers. And what I keep running into in some of the research I'm doing is the characteristics that every book talks about is just great characteristics to have in life. And so when you think about empathy and compassion, you don't need to be a leader to have empathy and compassion, but you need to choose to have empathy and compassion. And so I love that. For those who are listening, if you're like, oh, I'm striving for that leadership position, well, maybe take a look inwards. You probably are already a leader.
Yeah, I think that point that you're making about looking inside is understanding. And one of the key pieces of leadership, I believe, or good leaders, let's put it this way, or effective leaders, I think that's a better way to describe it. Effective leaders is the self-awareness piece. And I think that's what you're leading to there, Tim, is the leaders that I have found to be most effective, that I've either worked with or that I have studied, are the people that are the most self-aware. So they're really looking at and understanding, well, what are my strengths? Where are my areas for development? Where are my blind spots? And then have a willingness to improve around any of those areas. And sometimes improvement is making our strengths stronger. It's not always about shoring up weaknesses. It's about looking at what are those strengths that I have that I can improve even more so.
I love that. And I think it might lend itself to the next question. And our publication is centered around helping people build a better world of work. When you hear that phrase, build a better world of work, what comes to mind?
Excitement. I think because my big picture vision is healthy, happy people and workplaces. And so to get there, you have to have workplaces that are supportive of people. And also for workplaces to be supportive of people, workplaces have to get the results they need, to stay in business. So they go together.
It's so interesting you say that because this isn't scripted. We didn't pre-plan this. What we say in our publication is we are here to help you create happy, healthy, and productive workplaces. So when you said happy and healthy, I don't think we can be more aligned on that. And
How can you have a healthy and happy workplace? I get that healthy and happy people part. Well, so from my perspective, it's that healthy and happy people help create that healthy, happy workplace. They are the foundation. They are the foundation for that. A healthy, happy workplace also means that from a health perspective, and I think it's Patrick Lissoni that talks a lot about, the health of an organization. It's making sure your culture's there. It's making sure your policies and procedures are there that are healthy and support the organization and the culture. And that's what, from the organizational side, how it works.
yeah, and what a fantastic lead into our conversation about coaching culture and how, we talk about culture, and there's so many people like Patrick Lencioni who does talk about, some of the foundations of culture. When it comes to coaching and we think about it in the context of our workplace culture, what does that mean? Or maybe let's even back that up a little bit. What is your definition of coaching? And then we'll talk about workplace, and then we'll talk about that coaching culture.
It's so funny you say that because that's what I was going to do. I was going to say, well, wait a second. I think we need to go back and talk about what does coaching mean from my perspective. From my perspective, coaching really means that you practice as a leader You practice as a human being. You practice curiosity, empathy, and listening. And the way in which you can do that to be successful and supportive of your people is to ask powerful questions, to practice mindful listening that leads to results. And I call that the coaching formula. So it's powerful questions plus mindful listening that lead to results. So someone who is able to embody and embrace those traits is what I call a coach-like leader. And so a coach-like leader is someone that really brings the spirit of coaching to their own personal, authentic leadership style. So it's not changing who you are to become quote unquote a coach. What I'm looking at in the workplace is how you can take those fundamental coaching skills and apply them to your everyday leadership. So you become what we're seeing out there right now is we're seeing a lot of really stressed and overwhelmed people leaders. And we know many of the reasons that that's happening, Tim. And I don't think we have to go into all that explanation. But what we see is when we help those people leaders become more coach-like, they then are able to transform into impactful, everyday coaches. And that has a big impact. So it has a big impact on their teams and then spread out to other teams in the organization and then spread out to the culture as a whole. So you really see the coaching culture with coach-like leaders. And I hope that it answers the question that you are answering or asking me.
Oh, I think it fundamentally does. I think for our listeners who might be saying, okay, it's great, I need to ask powerful questions and mindful listening. I've got the listening part down, but what is a powerful question?
Yeah, good question. That's a powerful question. And I'll tell you why it's a powerful question. So I'll tell you why that's a powerful question. And powerful questions are questions that really help the other person look inside for their own answers. Powerful questions are phrased in a way that elicits some internal impact for the person that is asked the question. So it makes them think, in other words, it makes them think. Your question is making me think. The other thing about your question, a powerful question, assumes that you're going into the asking of that powerful question, that you're holding the person capable of being able to answer that question and to be able to dig deep inside themselves to bring that answer forth. Now, the other thing that was great about your question that made it powerful is you started the question with the word what. And powerful questions start with the words what and how, not why. And there's a reason for that. When we ask a what or how question, it really opens up a possibility for depth of response. When we ask a why question, what it often does is shut the recipient of that question down. And there's brain science, neuroscience reasons behind that. And quite simply, what happens is when you ask someone a why question, in the brain, the amygdala freaks out. It says, danger, danger, danger. This is a threat. This is a threat to me. And because your amygdala can't discern between a why question and a saber-toothed tiger. This has been with us for a very long time. And so when we feel that sense of a threat or danger, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. So what happens in an answering of questions for the coachee is that they go, I'm going to give maybe an excuse or a rationale, or I'm going to be defensive when asked that question. And so what was great about your question is you asked a what and a how, not a why. And your question was open-ended. So in other words, I couldn't just answer with a yes or a no, because when you ask a question that is closed-ended, a yes and a no, that's the end of the conversation almost, right? You've got to then dig a little harder as the person asking that question to really get some information and to get that person to open up.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I know I can put you on the spot there, but I think it's so important for us to even quickly unpack what a powerful question is. And I love your answer to that. I think of so many scenarios in work and life where I've been asked a question, why didn't you do that? Or why did you do it that way? It's like, oh, shoot, now I need to go into explanation mode. So I hope you got 20 minutes because I'm going to try and explain my rationale versus, let's have a conversation about this path that you chose to get this project off the ground. what's worked well, what hasn't worked well.
Yeah, you went right into defensive mode, right? You're just like, oh, now I have to explain myself. So that feels like you're a kid again and you're having to say, why are you late? Why didn't you come home on time?
Yeah. Well, my 5-year-old daughter, she came home from kindergarten and didn't eat her sandwich. And my default was, why didn't you eat your sandwich? And she said, oh, I was full. I already ate my cucumbers. And so then I reframed the question. I said, well, what was going on at lunch? And she said, oh, everyone was done really quick and I wanted to get outside and so I could go and play. But don't worry, I'm going to eat my sandwich. I'll eat it right now. And I said, no, it's been sitting in your lunch bag all day. Like it's, we don't need to be eating that. But so just even as we use that why language within our teams or even in our lives, just that practice of reframing that into a what and a how, I think is important.
Yeah, it's huge. Like you can't underestimate the power of it. And the example that you just gave was very powerful too, because what I heard in there is by you being able to reframe that question to your 5-year-old child, what that did was, one, it didn't push her into some guilt or shame feelings, number one. Number two, you learned so much more about her. And number three, it strengthened your relationship. And those things are applicable everywhere in life, but they really have a huge impact too in the workplace. Because if you just compare that example you gave and you could apply it in the workplace, and the outcomes are so much better for relationships, right? For productivity, for performance, for engagement, for retention. And then all of these things add up at the end of the day for better financial results for the organization, right? And better results for teams.
Yeah, I think I think of so many examples, and even throughout LinkedIn I was reading a thread recently about somebody kind of complaining about why their team doesn't turn on their cameras. My team needs to turn on their cameras. I don't know why they don't do that. It's like, okay, well, if that's a changed behavior, now it's an opportunity to put on that coach-like leader mindset and get curious. But often what gets in the way of that, Lisa, at least what I have heard is, oh man, that takes so much time. So how do we know it has a financial impact and a benefit when we create this meaningful dialogue, meaningful relationships in the workplace? How do we then translate that into, okay, well, it's worth the investment of time?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking there too is, what's the time money equation, in this as well. What we hear a lot when we start our program, the Coach Like Leader Experience, which is really designed to support people leaders to become everyday coaches, is this is an objection we hear a lot, Tim. So I'm glad you're bringing it up. It's that, I'm too busy. I don't have time. Coaching takes so much time. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you learn the coaching skills that we teach, coaching does not have to take a lot of time. It can take 10 minutes. Sometimes people have this sense that coaching is this hour-long conversation, that we need to sit down and have an hour-long performance conversation. Well, yes, you can do that with your coaching skills. But the kind of coaching too that we're talking about in the workplace is the kind that you can have between leader and team member, peer-to-peer, in 10 minutes or less, that will resolve a situation. I mean, how long did that conversation with your daughter take you?
Oh, it was, over in a couple minutes, less than 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's a mindset shift, I think, for leaders to go from, this is taking up so much time to do this, and then it's just easier for me to do it, right? And that's sort of that classic case of, I won't delegate because it's easier for me to do. I don't have the time. And we say in the Coach Like Leader Experience that 80% of the time in circumstances, you can default to the coach approach, and it will save you time, and it will save you frustration, and it will save you money. You know me, I love coaching. I think it is a great thing. I think every person should have these skills in an organization, particularly people leaders, because they have the biggest impact, right? They're able to spread that across the organization. However, 20% of the time is not really for coaching. There are other skill sets that need to be used. And so when are those times primarily? Well, the times when coaching doesn't make sense in the moment is when there's significant consequences to the organization, either financially or reputationally, if something isn't dealt with immediately. And that is a time when a leader may and need to step in and take the reins because the consequences are too great. But that doesn't mean that you cannot go back later and have a coaching conversation with the individual involved in this to work through it so that that situation doesn't arise again. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think of a recent podcast that I've recorded where we're talking a little bit about coaching and just touched on it briefly but also as leaders, sometimes we need to be making decisions. If there's a big crisis going on in the organization, people are looking to us to make decisions. And we can then unpack, how did we get in that situation? What caused that situation? If it's an individual or a team that did something, completely wrong and caused some problems, if you're coming in with, lack of a better phrase, just like guns blazing, you're just, kind of shooting from the hip. It's like, why did this happen? And you're looking, my good friend Matthew Gould would say, is like, who to fault? Like, who are we looking to fault here? And instead, let's go, so what now? And so if we use that coaching mindset and practice it, but also, like you said from the beginning, as a leader is about self-awareness. I think we need that level of self-awareness in order to know how to be a good coach. Does that make sense? Or is that not?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So I think when you become more coach-like as a leader, what you're doing is you're helping those that you work with, that report to you, that are part of your team, become more self-aware. Because as a coach, or using coach-like behavior, you are helping people uncover what they already know within themselves. And, that's the underlying philosophy of coaching, is the answer resides within the person, not you, right? And so when leaders start to really understand that, and that coaching mindset, that the answer lies within the individual and not within them, that's a big shift in how you approach a situation. So that's when you're saying, I hold my people capable of being able to do things. Now, that does not mean you have to abdicate making sure that they have that capability and capacity to do the work that you're giving them, but you're holding them capable to be able to come to solutions and answers, right? And not presuming that they won't. Okay. And that goes a big way in removing and getting out of sort of what you were referring to, which was more of a blame, a blame culture. And I honestly believe, and not everyone's going to agree with me on this one, but I honestly believe when something misfires or backfires on your team as a leader, it's ultimately your fault. There's something that you didn't do right there. There's something you didn't ascertain the situation properly. You didn't communicate properly. You didn't ask enough questions. You didn't set enough clear expectations, or you may think you have set clear expectations, but you didn't ensure there was shared agreement around those expectations. And what coaching skills do is they help facilitate that, so that you can have and build more of an atmosphere of accountability within your team, because you now have the skill set to do that in a way that really engages other people and helps them be their best. And when you help others be their best, then you bring out the best in yourself too.
What I'm hearing there is that sense of ownership, and creating that sense of ownership within your role, but also within your team. Because some people might not agree with you about, hey, if something fails in the organization or within your team, it's on you. I do agree with that. I think ultimately the leader is responsible. And, if something happens, or a bad apple on your team and does something disruptive, it's on us as leaders to know that there's a bad apple on our team and it's causing some destruction. Like there's no excuse in that.
Yeah. Well, you asked before, what is a leader, right? And I said a vision and the ability to inspire people to action. That's the big picture, but and making the choice to do that. But when we make the choice to be a leader, we also make the choice to make hard decisions, and that's part of what you're putting your hand up for when you make that choice to lead.
Yeah. So we've spent some time talking about powerful questions. Thanks for unpacking that. It's such a useful tool and such an important tool. I studied business process and business operations, and we were taught the very basic technique of 5 whys. And it's a 5 why to get to the root of a problem. But if we try that with humans, and even I would say even maybe we should adapt that model to the 5 what the 5 what and hows. Man, we're going to get to roots of issues and problems and opportunities within our people quite quickly. What I heard early on was there's the two sides. There's the powerful questions and the mindful listening. What is mindful listening? Why don't we unpack that a little bit?
I would love to be a coach right now and say to you, Tim, what do you think mindful listening is?
Well, you know what? My son, he's in grade 4. He came home a few days ago, and said to me, he was telling me a story, and then he paused and said, "Dad, you're not actively listening to me." And so I put my phone down and went, "Tell me more." And he was learning this in grade 4 about active listening. And a simple definition was put your phone down, also meaning no distractions. Also repeating what you heard. And I've caught that a few times, Lisa, as I'm talking, you're saying, "Oh, what I'm hearing is," or "I've heard this." And that is being able to repeat back what you are hearing. And he also said, kind of clearing your mind so you're not jumping to a conclusion. So if you say something and that's all I'm fixated on, I've now lost everything in between. What's the start of the conversation to the end of the conversation? Because I just want to interject my thought into that. So that's what my 8-year-old, almost 9-year-old son taught me this week, or reminded me this week, about freeing distraction, giving full focus to an individual and into that person, and saying, you matter, you mean something, what you're saying is impactful, and I'm going to devote my time to you.
So there's a few things I love about your answer. The first thing is, I love that your son at 9 years of age is learning about active listening. Yay, because the earlier we learn, the better. It's going to help us. Two, I just generally love your kids because the stories that you're telling me about them, they sound really fantastic. And the third is that I love the way that you put that answer together, because in a nutshell, that is mindful listening. The only thing that I would add, and what we teach in the Coach Like Leader experience, is we go a little bit deeper in that. And so when we talk about mindful listening, it quite simply what we mean, and I think I'm paraphrasing what you said, Tim, is first and foremost is to be present, right? So mindfulness is really baked on the idea of being fully present to your situation. So being fully present means I am really here with you right now. I'm taking in, everything about you, what you're saying, how you're saying it, the way you're moving. If I can see you, if I can't see you, I'm listening for body language, because you can do that. You can do that too. And that means being able to eliminate, as you said, all of your distractions. And then there's a few more tips that we give in terms of how, when you're being more coach-like, how you can use active listening in a way that really supports the conversation for the coachee so they get better results. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I asked you a question and I was watching you and you rolled your eyes at me, but went on with an answer, I'd be like, okay, so something might not have landed quite right. Tell me a little bit about that. That's not what happened. If you're listening to this, Lisa, at least when I'm looking at her on the camera, she's not rolling her eyes at me, so that's a good sign. But I think it's important when we are free from that distraction. I love that, just being present. I think, thanks for summing it up so concisely. And so we know, again, that asking powerful questions, being present, that mindful listening, just at its basics, will have such an impact on our organization. How do we get started in this?
Well, there's one thing I want to add to that equation. So the coaching formula is powerful questions plus mindful listening that lead to results. So if you've had a conversation and you've practiced powerful questions and mindful listening, but there's been no results that have come out of that conversation for you and the coachee, then you've had a lovely conversation, Tim, but you've not had a coaching conversation from my perspective. So what we're looking for when we're having a coaching conversations is the powerful questions, the mindful listening, but having results at the end of the conversation. So results mean an action plan. What is the person going to do? What is the next step, right? And so that is the completion of that. So if we really want to have a successful coaching conversation, we need to have all three of those elements. So I really wanted to clear that up, that there's a full formula for that. And you're going to need to ask me the question you asked me again, because I got sidelined into just having some clarification around the coaching formula. Yeah.
No, thanks for taking the time and clarifying that. Absolutely. It's without results, then like you said, it's just a conversation. It's, okay, what are you going to do about that? Just a friend this week, I was talking to him about something and he said, so what are you going to do about that? And I said, I don't like that question. And next question, please. And he said, can you do X within the next 4 weeks? And so now it's time bound. And I squirmed and said, well, I'm going to give it a try. He said, well, give it a try or actually do it. And so I couldn't get out of it. He's one of my best friends, so he can challenge me pretty fiercely. And I appreciate that about it. Otherwise, it's a conversation. So if somebody comes to your office or your virtual, office, quote unquote, Google Meet or whatever, and is talking about something, how do we then drive for those results? Like, what is that results-oriented kind of closing question? If the coach-like leader is coaching can take 5 to 10 minutes, how do we then quickly unpack powerful questions? We're listening, and then we need a result.
Great question. So the one example would be, what's your next step? To clarify shared agreement, like you said, that I've been doing with you. What I heard you said you were going to do was X by X. Is that correct? Did I hear that right? Because that might have come up in the conversation, the actual deliverables. What do you believe would be potential obstacles that may get in your way of meeting your goal? So there's some examples right there that are results-oriented questions to support the coachee and your understanding of what that next step is. Yeah.
I love that. What's your next step versus why do you think you wouldn't get it done? So it's kind of the same question, just repacked in a more impactful way. And so my question a little bit ago was, where do we start? How do we get this into our organizations? Aside from taking your program, aside from, which is, we'll talk about that at the end, but we know it will drive our organizations forward. And so how do we bring this change, this culture change into our organizations?
Well, I think, not to oversimplify things, but one person at a time, I think is part of the answer. The second part of the answer is what we started to talk about right at the outset of our conversation, is just become a little more curious, stay in a conversation a little bit longer, get out of yourself and get into wanting to know more about the other person. And the more that you learn about the other person, and learning and asking and being with that person in an empathetic way will make a huge difference. If people can just start doing that every day more, Tim, I think you and I will be well on our way to our vision of, happy, healthy workplaces, right? Because you can imagine just how much better a lot of the situations that we're in right now worldwide would be better if we had more curiosity and more empathy.
Curiosity and empathy, it's things we talk about, we read about, and yet we still struggle with. And getting curious in such a way that's meaningful and impactful. Asking somebody to, if you have the time and the space, to tell me more. Tell me a little bit about your story. Tell me what's going on. I saw a pattern happening over the last couple of weeks and showing up for meetings like, what's happening? What's going on? Versus, why are you not showing up?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I like the examples that you were giving with your kids, because I think sometimes for people, it feels, if you have young people in your life, like whether they're your own children or you're connected with them in some way, that you tend to be more compassionate and patient often with children sometimes, and the opposite can happen too, depending on what's going on. But by and large, I think that you do. And I think being able to just slow down a little bit to be more curious about others. And ultimately, I think it quite simply means, and the reason I brought up the children connection is because there's a caring component there, right? You feel as an adult when around someone who's younger, sort of this innate need or desire to care, right? To care for, to take care of. So I think that when you are in the workplace, to your example, it's when you practice curiosity and empathy, you're ultimately showing care for people. And sometimes we get so busy, I really don't like that word, but we get so busy and distracted, and we're moving so quickly from one thing to the other, we forget about, I don't think this is intentional. I think we just are rushing and we forget to stop just for a millisecond or two to be caring and show that care to other people through curiosity and empathy.
It's always been a caution flag, not a red flag, but a caution flag when I hear an organization or hear somebody or I read a job description that says we're fast-paced. So I always love to unpack that. Well, what does that mean? And then how does care show up for you in your workplace? I was talking with somebody today who was working for literally a fast-paced organization under immense pressure from external forces, the organization was, and they lost sight of caring for people. And people were quitting. People were getting sick. They saw a huge uptake in people taking time off for their mental health. And yet it was, no, we're fast paced. We got to keep going. Like, you can't keep up. You're not part of this organization. So for somebody who is listening and it says, hey, I work for a fast paced organization, or, read that in a job description, unpack that, get curious, question it. I mean, in any interview, you've got question time, question period, but even put on that coach like leader mindset and ask some powerful questions there. But so we've talked about powerful questions. We've talked about mindful listening. We've talked about results. What is one thing someone can do today to bring this coaching mindset into the workplace? I know we talked about curiosity and empathy and care. When somebody is listening to this and going, I'm still stuck, what next?
I'm trying to think what would be a simple action that you can take outside of the curiosity and the empathy. I think that it would be to believe in yourself and within yourself that the people that you work with do have their own answers. Coming back to that basic underpinning of coaching philosophy, that the answer lies within the individual, and to be able to support bringing those answers out through some of the methodologies that we've been talking about. So I think if you could really go into everyday workplace situation and in your life, like you've been describing, Tim, is that knowing that answer lies within that person and doing your best to support them to self-discover it and to help them excavate, those answers.
Such a powerful way, in my opinion, to wrap up that conversation, or to wrap up this conversation. The answers are often within. Sometimes we need a little nudge and maybe need some influence there, but going into our workplaces with that mindset of, somebody's going to ask me a question today. Instead of just giving an answer, let's set aside distraction. Let's ask a couple questions. I think it doesn't need to be delayed. You don't necessarily need to go down that certification route in order to be a coach, in order to start coaching.
No, not at all. I think that this is open and available to everybody. And as I said before, I think if everybody can do that, we're going to see a different workplace. We're going to see a different world. And I think that's really what drives me, and in listening and speaking with you, what drives you as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Lisa, it's such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit and spend some time with you today. For those who are listening and are interested to learn more about the Coach Like Leader and the coach mindset, how can people reach you? What's the best way for people to find you?
Thank you for asking. The best way to find us is at coachlikeleader.com. And we've got a great blog there. We've got lots of resources available for people. And in fact, what you and I were just talking about now about powerful questions, on our blog, if you go, there is a post there about powerful questions. And there's a great cheat sheet that you can download that will really support you, and lots of examples of powerful questions. And then LinkedIn, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm there quite a bit and love to chat with people, and you can DM me there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll definitely include those links in the show notes. And again, Lisa, thanks for coming on and having just a very impactful conversation today. And for those who are listening, I really hope you take this to heart and start thinking about powerful questions, thinking about how you're showing up when you're listening, and thinking about those results which are within people. And so if you do enjoy this show and like what you've heard, or have some feedback, please send me an email at tim@peoplemanagingpeople.com, or find me on LinkedIn. And if you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to the show. So thanks again, Lisa, for coming on.
My pleasure. It was lovely to chat with you.